That's great. I'm going to read an excerpt from my novel, Wells Without Water. This is actually an early proof copy that I put together right when the girl who designed it, she was actually a Dutch photographer who's just 22 years old, put this together and read the story and decided to let me use it for free. So I printed it up really fast with terrible letters and just had that. If anyone actually wants to check it out, though, it's going to be either at any future reading or you can find it on Amazon. It's called Wells Without Water. In the meantime, I'm going to read something a little bit different from last time that, Jeff, you've heard. And it's actually, to give it a really quick preface, I got an agent pretty early on that I ended up parting with. And her biggest contribution was sort of to help me out with the supporting characters. The main characters she thought were really strong, and the supporting characters were sort of two-dimensional. I think she called them cardboard cutouts. And since I had matured so much as a writer through the initial draft, writing at the end of all of it, these supporting characters and kind of filling them out made them some of my favorite characters, and this is one of them. And his name is Niklas. Niklas Henry Peterson, born Niklas Hershkowitz, but he had abandoned the loathsome German surname in 1940 after immigrating to America for asylum and citizenship. In synagogue as a child, he had been Niklas ben Yosef, a kind boy, an inquisitive boy. Almost he had gone so far as to change his name entirely, but he had not meant to deny himself to that degree. For the bitter path which had consigned him to a town dug deep into the Alabama wilderness must never be forgotten. In spite of the vandalism and the unruliness, he made a point to never complain to the guests of his inn. Often they would sneak in through a bedroom window. Often they would refuse to pay up front and recall suddenly upon leaving that they had left their billfolds at home, affecting regret, solicitude, promising to settle their debts on the occasion of their return. The debts, of course, were never settled. Consequently, his profits were modest. He came close to breaking even on certain slow months of the year after taxes, after utilities and insurance, but even would suffice. It began at 8 o'clock in the evening, every evening save Sunday. One of his regulars, Albert Thatcher, liked to call it the hour of debauchery. It was when most of the workers had clocked out from the mine and Arthur Davies, one of their own, had bathed himself and endured dinner with his wife and girl and broken free at last to open the bar he ran out of his cellar. "That's where the trouble always starts," said Al Thatcher, drawing closer to Niklas. "Old Arthur's basement. His two little ladies be damned. But this, sure as the resurrection itself," and he arched his hand, indicating the dusky parlor. "This is where the trouble always wind up." He was grinning wide through his sandy beard, a smell of whiskey on his breath. It was well past midnight. The lamp was burning on the counter, along with a pillar candle, and Al's elbows were situated between them in a clumsy sort of bending posture that only a drunk could find comfortable. Niklas passed his fingertips through his baby-thin gray hair, saying nothing, as was his habit. Al meant the whores, of course, when he spoke of trouble. Not the whores exclusively. Some men came in happy groups after Arthur had closed up for the night, knowing they were in no condition to return home, and others who weren't so keen would come in happy groups, and others who weren't so keen would show up soon on their own after, shamed and shunned by their wives, even their children. But the whores commanded such a presence as to brand the night their own. Niklas was stunned half the time, seeing their youthful faces. Mere girls of 15, 16, bearing the weight of those drunken suitors twice and thrice their age, their faces powdered, their lips glossed and red or pink, or black as dark from the coal from the mine, complimenting their loose-fitting tops or those ridiculous skirts they wore, cut so far up on the thigh that Niklas felt a stab of guilt just watching. The parlor was awash in the hanging floral fragrance of their perfume, even at this late hour. A piercing potpourri of vanilla and jasmine and laurel so sweet it stung the nostrils. It was a sweetness by which he had come to be revolted, for he knew it served partly to overpower the foulness of an evening hard at work. Still, though he would avert his eyes as they passed by to their rooms, though he would suspend his breaths with nausea, they would smile at him suggestively. Still they would solicit him, Niklas himself, with their painted eyes. their hips swinging, as no doubt they had learned from the films or perhaps from the veterans of their trade, such boldness in their glances, such pride. While the men at their arms blundered by awkwardly, sheepishly, shielding their faces occasionally with the ring hand, and pushing forth a confusion of soiled bills and loose chains that Nicholas didn't dare ask them to sort out, aware as he was of their quiet shame. Al Thatcher took up his handle of whiskey and poured himself another inch, another two, set it down again. God knows where they get hauled in from, them whores, he said. Montgomery, if I had to guess. It's Cliff Daniels and Bernie Isaacson who's been put to driving north and rounding them up, seeing as Cliff's a widower and Bernie's never been wedded to start with, and neither of them anyhow has got no sort of image to look after. But it's all minnows to what we was doing before, mixing up with our own right here in Sardis. Men stooping to shameful, sorry lows. Men making fools of themselves in front of folks they got to face in church the next day. I myself shared the bed of Bonnie Hayworth on more than one occasion, and even Rosalind Frost, much as it pains me to say it. But it's like the pastor says, we all guilty as hell. You remember what happened to Arthur Davies, kind as he's been to us, offering his home, slaving away behind that bar of his? How we had to hear about his own daughter getting propositioned by Eddie Conway's boy, that shameless, half-witted son of a bitch. But it's just as I say, Mr. Nicholas, we all guilty as hell, every damn one of us, down to the last. We all noticed a skirt or two in our lives. On the air hung faintly the suggestion of their perfume, or perhaps it was in Nicholas's head, but what did it matter? He gave no comment, as was his custom, and Al, watching him frankly, affably, became suddenly impatient. The smile no longer sincere, but twisted wryly in derision. But not you, is that it? Not righteous old Mr. Nicholas, hell no. He'll keep to himself. He don't engage in no questionable behavior with no whores, not him. Well, excuse me, Jesus, if I didn't recognize you. Our own Lord and Savior, come down to our yokel town, born in an inn, and by God you run one too. I am like any other. I have my own guilt. Then come out with it already, said Al. He tossed back the last of his glass and dropped down again upon his forearms and elbows, bending over them. If a man comes to you honest-like and gives you a shame, don't you know it's plain courtesy to give him yours in return? The burning wick of the candle by the radio had withered at last down to the soupy wax, and it winked out suddenly with a sound almost resembling a kiss. Al's shadow was cast aslant in the darkness against the mantelpiece. He watched Nicholas, and Nicholas answered his gaze sternly, austerely, for indeed he had never spoken of his history to anyone in Sardis, and he could recall with near-perfect clarity the long trip over the Atlantic toward Ellis Island, claustrophobic most of the time, with his fellow passengers of the German and Polish Jewry, heroes, half of them, and victims too. While in fact, Nicholas was just the opposite. In Germany, some years before the extermination camps, he had been given an offer. His old friend Heinrich, who was not himself a Jew, had been privy to certain political developments and had brought Nicholas into his library after hours, where no ears could pry. He had told him of a train departing for Poland and then the Netherlands, from which a ship would set sail for the States. America was closing its doors to refugees, Heinrich had said, and Britain as well, and the rest of their neighbors to the west. It would be perhaps Nicholas's last opportunity to get out of the country. You must travel alone. The ship will depart in 3 weeks. And my family? Your wife is Catholic like me, and your daughter can avow the same. They will follow you, Nicholas, when the opportunity comes. Meanwhile, they will be safe. For years afterward, Nicholas would lay awake brooding. For years afterward, he would puzzle and obsess over whether Heinrich had known all along the folly of his words, had lied in the full awareness of the Nuremberg laws soon to be passed, which Nicholas wouldn't read about until after his voyage. For years afterward, he would wonder, had he himself known? Had he understood in his gut, if not in his mind, that he would never see his wife again, his little Angelica? He had gone to them, after all, and he had uttered to them the same words that Heinrich had uttered to him, and in the same doubtless tone, telling his daughter, "Of course you will be fine, you are silly to worry," telling his wife, "Stay with your parents, it won't be more than a year." Al was watching him with his dark, expectant eyes, breathing unevenly and patiently. Nicholas had declined to share in the whiskey, but now, without thinking, he seized it by the neck and turned it up to his lips, his hold unsteadied from the sloshing, shifting weight and the excitement of his own nerves, swallowing down 2 whole mouthfuls and coughing huskily as he lowered it again. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He regarded Al candidly in the lamplight. "Do you see those pictures there by the door?" he said, gesturing. Al glanced over his shoulder at the 2 darkened photos in the nightstand, the image on the left depicting Nicholas and his wife and daughter posing so gloomily, so stoically, though in those times his little Angelica had been such a restless girl. "Meryl, my wife," he said, "and my daughter Angelica." Al studied the yellowed black and whites for a long moment until at last his posture slackened, and the slight grimace fell away from his features. "I seen them portraits before," he said. "Had me a good look at the fellow there between the dolls and knew it was your own self with a full head of curls. She's right handsome, your missus. And surely it goes the same now for your missy, too, and any other little one she might have after all this time. What, was it 40 years ago? 50? Nicholas had not turned his eyes from Al. He could feel the liquor setting in now, making his head swim. 40 years ago, he said. The year before I abandoned them. 2 years before they were dragged from a cathedral by German soldiers and spat on as Jews and beaten until they were unconscious. They died of their wounds. It was my own fate, and I left it to those I loved most." Al watched him without remark. Then he began to shake his head so subtly that Nicholas thought he might be imagining it. His face was glowing, and he had worked himself up from the counter almost to his full height. Quietly, Nicholas said, "You speak to me of guilt, but I live here out of guilt. I came away from New York in the home which had been shared with me. I found buses and trains and taxicabs which might bring me to the ends of the earth where I could live out the rest of my days in exile. I changed my name. I had a decent savings which I kept carefully, for I wanted to endure in my guilt, not be released from it by death. And it was here, ultimately, that I found myself. Here that I stopped. Sardis, Alabama. Not the end of the earth, maybe, but the closest thing I had ever seen." "Good Lord," Al said, backing away from the counter. He was shaking his head more clearly now. "I don't reckon Mr. Holland's old man would have let you buy this in off him had he known you was half a Nazi. I don't reckon none of us here in town would have put up with you. You come here calling Sardis the end of the earth like it's below you. Like it ain't fit for no one living a good and decent life. You come here and not once in my lifetime do I see you in a church. That's the only place that'll set you straight, Mr. Nicholas, there and nowhere else. But it's below you, ain't it? Our church here at the end of the earth, well, I think I've had about enough of you." And he began to head for the door, crossing his feet clumsily and stumbling into the mantelpiece. "Nazi bastard. You stay where you at now. You stay there, and when I get back, I'm going to burn this place straight to the ground and all the way to hell where it goes. You stay right where you at." And then he passed out into the cold and shuffled away through the lot. After several minutes, Nicholas got to his feet and went to the door. He waited not uneagerly for almost half an hour. But Al Thatcher and his fire never came. Instead, it was snow.
Yeah.
And this is Chris Perot.